Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of Building Life Sciences Adventures. And welcome and thank you to those who have joined us today and couldn't make it yesterday. The first session of today is the challenges of benchmarking in remuneration. We have a lovely panel here with us. And before I hand you over, just a couple of housekeeping points. If we could have our mics on mute, please, that would be great. Feel free to keep cameras on, that's absolutely fine. And just a reminder that the session is being recorded. By all means, if you have any questions, do pop them in the chat box. You could either pick them up at the end or through the discussion. We'll see how it goes. And lastly, there are closed captions enabled if you need them. So now I'll hand you over to Neil and the rest of the panel, and I hope you enjoy the session.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I was going to say how pleased I was that we all made it on here for 9 o'clock, but we were a few minutes late, technical problems, so apologies for that, and thanks for bearing with us. So the talk we're going to do today, as Mona Lisa said, the challenges of benchmarking in remuneration. So first of all, my name's Neil Walton. I work at a company called CY Partners. We're a specialist scientific recruitment consultancy. I run our southern operations. I just wanted to go around and let the others introduce themselves before we get started. Jacob?
Me first. Okay, good stuff. So Jacob Midwinter, currently in between companies doing some bits and bobs, but done 12 years in life sciences staffing now.
Dan?
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Dan. I also work at CY Partners. I've worked in life sciences recruitment now for about 20 years. So supporting companies from small biotech through to big global pharma companies with their talent challenges, and equally advising and supporting people looking for work with their career choices, predominantly throughout the UK, but further afield.
And Philippa?
Sorry, you can't see any of me. I'm smiling away. Very happy to be here. But yeah, my name's Philippa Clark. I work for SRG. I've got 20 years experience now, mainly working with startups and biotechs, mainly across the Golden Triangle, but also cover sort of Europe and further across the UK. I'm really excited to join this discussion today.
Brilliant. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with benchmarking, salary benchmarking, remuneration benchmarking, but just thought I'd go explain that just before we start. So essentially, it's the process of gathering and analysing data about average salaries for particular jobs, and organisations tend to do this when they're looking at salary reviews, but also sort of pre-hiring. So they know that what they're going to market with is a competitive proposition. And what we want to do today is sort of have a look at that, have a look at some best practices around benchmarking, and also sort of answer the question as to is it enough, effectively. So I suppose to kick us off, we'll talk around the gathering of data and how reliable that is. Is there anyone who has anything to say about gathering? There we go. Hello, Philippa. Around gathering data for benchmarking and how reliable that data can tend to be.
I mean, I'm happy to sort of kick off. I mean, I think with benchmarking, I think it's always been really useful to obviously look at salaries and gather data. But I think it's, as we were sort of talking about earlier, already your sort of data is in the past. You've got to make sure that you've got a really good source of data and that the quality is there. And whilst benchmarking is important, often the problem with benchmarking is that you are just focusing on salary, and there's probably not as much data out there that really compares between, looks at benefits between different companies, and looks at things like flexibility, and considers that there's new skills and new jobs coming into the market all of the time. So while benchmarking certainly has its benefits, I think in isolation it's not giving you the full picture.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Just to sort of add on to what Philippa said, I think there's a couple of things. You've got two aspects to it. You've got considerations that you need to make when doing benchmarking, and then you've also got to consider, as Philippa says, the accuracy of the data. I think when we're looking at considerations, there's a few points. Philippa touched upon a really good one. That's that point in time data. But also it's job title comparison. So you've got to think about where you're taking this data from. If you're going just on job title basis, well, job titles vary company to company. We're not actually looking at the skills and the value that that person may be bringing to that business in addition to their job title. So there could be a pitfall there. I think also it doesn't take into account, or what you've got to be careful of, I should say, when taking into account benchmarking, are individual motivations as well. So for example, somebody may have taken a lower level of salary or remuneration package because maybe they wanted more flexibility from the business. So again, a consideration that needs to be made. And I think it is important, and I will come on to it as well, but not to be blinkered just by the salary. There's other elements to it that I know we're all quite passionate about. I won't go on to the accuracy of data just yet, otherwise it'll just be my voice talking for quite a while. So, I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that, or you've got other questions, but there are some points around the accuracy as well, which I can come back to.
Yeah, I mean, certainly completely, Jacob. I think it's, the remuneration, the salary is not, it's a huge factor. We're currently living in an economic climate, and salary is a big factor for people, but any surveys that we do suggest that job seekers or employees are not just focusing on the actual salary. It's the additional benefits that they get. It's the flexible work options. It's the strong culture within a company, one where they feel engaged, and ultimately, because they're engaged, help drive the success of that business. And they're all major factors that, overarching need to be considered, as well as the actual salary.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dan, just while we're on you, have you noticed any changes with regards to benchmarking? I suppose now we're in a more remote or hybrid sort of working environment these days. Has that provided any challenges?
I think the dynamics of how you would do the benchmark has changed. I mean, job seekers aren't just applying for roles now in their local area. Certainly those roles that can be done remotely, the traditional jobs that would be site-based and continue to be site-based, the benchmarking data needs to be taken within the sort of local area, and that's to get accurate information for employers and to ensure they're competing with other local organizations that would, be looking to employ that local workforce. However, the workforce that can work from home, the data needs to be taken from a wider area. Job seekers have more, they can work for companies that are further afield. They're not just necessarily looking for companies in the local area. So that data needs to be taken from a wider area, and that perhaps can bring it challenges if, you're then competing with the big multinationals that, on in your region as employer, you're competing with their salaries and the packages that they can offer. So it has changed the dynamic, and it's created a situation where you have to look further afield, especially for those remote roles. And equally, I think in life sciences, as kind of the digital revolution kind of progresses, you're not, and the need for the changing types of people, like, people who work in data scientists, traditionally roles that you can work. You're not necessarily just competing with other biotech or life sciences companies for those types of people. You're competing with perhaps the tech industry. So you need to, consider that as a factor in why where you're getting the data and information from.
No, absolutely.
I was just going to say, just to add to that, I've seen a slightly different trend coming from a sort of smaller biotechs and startups, where we've seen a lot of those companies almost move away from those sort of more generalized benchmarking and are doing much more personalized benchmarking. And what's actually been really good to see is communities of like-minded biotechs and startups coming together to talk more openly about salaries and benchmarking, because they've all got their niche skills that they're looking for, but actually seeing an openness in those discussions and really personalizing a lot of the benchmarking. So it's not just about salary, it's thinking about flexible working, hybrid working, the type of projects people will be working on. And I think it gets quite complex when new skills and new jobs are being created, because you have to sort of have more open discussions, because that data isn't just sat there ready for you to sort of take. So I think it probably largely depends on the area of science that you're in, but I think startups and biotechs have definitely evolved in their benchmarking data.
Yeah, no, definitely, absolutely. And I going back to Dan's point about seeing data scientists from outside of biotech. I mean, I did some benchmarking for a company a couple of years ago, and the people we were looking at that had the skills in data analytics came from places like online gambling companies, and the salaries in that industry are significantly higher than biotech. So whilst it wasn't, maybe as attractive as a proposition in terms of the work you're doing and the area you're working in, it, from a purely benchmarking and analytical perspective, it was quite a skew on the data that we were seeing, because we were having to look outside the industry. But Jacob, you talked about, and you didn't kind of go into it, but about the kind of reliability of data. So do you want to talk about that a little bit now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we don't want to come across like we're just bashing benchmarking there, right? It is really important. If you're not doing it, do it. If you're a candidate on the market, it's incredibly important to understand what your worth is from a market value, not an individual value. I think it's important also to think about what you were paid isn't what necessarily you should be paid. And then from a business perspective, to ensure that you're attracting the right candidates, and retaining the right candidates as well, you want to ensure that you have your benchmarking correct. So it is really important, but we just got, I think what we're doing is we're just raising awareness of some of those pitfalls. So kind of 4 or 5 main points around accuracy of data that I'll talk about. And I think first and foremost is coming down back to that industry piece that you just talked about, industry bias. So we've got to think about where these companies are benchmarking salaries from. Some companies will benchmark it from job adverts, and looking at a study in 2022, like a pay scale study, only 13% of job ads actually included an accurate salary, right? So you've suddenly got 87% of job ads that you're not accounting for. Also, we've got to think about job ads tend to be very basic, around just a job title and maybe some skills that are included in there. But some industries, and to come to your point there, will be more likely to advertise than other industries. So again, it's a consideration, where are you putting this from? The second point is around, we're putting a lot of trust in people. And people are proud, right? If you've got somebody calling you, so if you're going to try and be more accurate with calling individuals and getting that data from, or you employ an agency consultancy to do this for you, we've got to think about personal pride. Are they inflating those salaries? Because maybe they know what they should be getting paid and they're not. And equally, it's in their interest as people to inflate that salary, because obviously if a report's done, then they're able to go to their current employer and go, hey, look, I've just seen this, or Glassdoor says that this salary I should be getting paid 50 when actually I'm getting paid 30 or whatever. So I think we've got to think about that personal pride element and that selfish element. In addition to that, it's very hard to get primary data. And if we think about, no company's going to give up their salaries, right? You're not going to call up a company and they're going to say, well, here you go, this is what we pay all of our staff. It's not going to happen. That's the most reliable data. That's the primary data. What we then have is secondary data when we're talking to people. So you're going to lose some validity in that data there. And then by the time we then actually look at job boards, or we then compile that as a consultancy or as a thing, that's then tertiary data. So that's just something to bear in mind, that, don't put full trust in that benchmarking. Use it to maybe guide you. And it can be important, but really think about, actually, this isn't primary data you're getting. You are actually 9 times out of 10 going to be getting tertiary data. And that obviously comes with its pitfalls.
Absolutely. No, thank you. I think that's a really interesting point. And I mean, we've kind of touched a little bit on some of the other elements of this. So how did the personalized benefits come into this, and what are they, and how would you go about benchmarking that kind of thing?
Yeah, so, and I can't remember sorry, I'll take this one, guys.
Yeah, go for it.
I'll just keep talking. I can't remember the statistics, but I previously worked at SRG, for those that don't know, and we did a white paper on the motivations for people to be moving, and salary itself, it didn't come out as top. And people on the call and people that watch this may actually think about what their own motivations are for looking for a job, and is salary the number one there? So I touched upon it earlier around the considerations that when somebody talks about their benefits package, when somebody talks about their salary to you, that's very personal to them based on their motivations. And what companies seem to be doing and doing more of is this personalized benefits. So they're creating a menu of benefits for people. And this could be varying pensions, it could be childcare, maternity, paternity cover, healthcare, flexibility. And it's about a workplace really listening to their workforce. Really what we're talking about here is employee value proposition, but I'll let someone else really define that and talk about it, so you don't get bored of my voice. And I think, again, when coming to benchmarking, what are we actually benchmarking? What is important? So when we talk about remuneration, let's not get blinkered on salary. Let's think about what sort of workplace we want to be, what we want to be able to offer our staff, our workforce, and then think about how do we maybe benchmark that wider, more holistic approach, and be able to then offer a more valuable data, more personalized data, and more of an EVP to our workforce.
I mean, I think the more personalized data comes from kind of the end-to-end sort of employee process, doesn't it, really, from when they initially apply to a job for an organization, go through the recruitment process, work for that organization for however long that might be, and then, you know, once they exit the business, if they do, and it's getting information for every individual that goes through that process. It makes it more personalized. It's, you know, why would they join a company, or why are they looking to leave their current organization, what would keep them in that business, you know, not just salary. So it's, you know, you've got lots of data points that are available to you now, and it's keeping those updated all the time, really. It's very, very important, rather than just reviewing the annual surveys or what, you know, what the jobs are advertised online. It's you know, it's doing surveys with your employees. It's, you know, surveying sort of people who've applied for roles within your organization as well. And it's, you know, it's gathering that data and tailoring appropriately so you can attract and retain the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, we was thinking about this in terms of a lot of company benefits these days. It's not one size fits all. People have often a menu of benefits that they can pick from. They'll get a value pot, if you will, and they'll be able to select things up to that value. So, you know, you could speak to one person from an organization who gets a gym membership. Someone else gets private healthcare. Maybe they don't all get all of it, but it's hard to identify exactly what the value of that pot is when you've got lots of different elements, and those elements are kind of, you know, flexible within that greater benefits setup. And I think that's often a consideration to sort of look at when you're trying to establish the value of that in itself. I guess we've talked about sort of benchmarking and you know, how to go about that, some of the challenges with regards to the data and the sort of reliability of that. We touched a little bit on EVP, but I thought we would kind of go into that a little bit more now. But Philippa, I didn't know if you wanted to sort of talk to us a little bit about EVP, what that is as a concept.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously we talk a lot about EVP, and I think this discussion lends it to that very well. So essentially, EVP is an employee's value proposition. I guess it is their unique offering. It's what sets them aside and differentiates them from other companies. So it's who you are as a business, your values, your culture, your story. And I see EVP as an exciting opportunity to really put yourself out there in the market as a company, to make sure that you attract and retain the best talent. And it's been quite interesting because EVP has been around for many years, but I do feel that we talk about it a lot more as the competition for talent has got tough out there. I think also the emphasis on talent looking at EVPs. You know, we speak to a lot of candidates that wouldn't necessarily just go for a job based on salary. They're looking at who the company is. Does that company represent their values? Does that company, will I have impact if I go and work at that company? So in terms of EVP, it's always been around, but I think it's evolved from just essentially being a tick box exercise to something that is at the forefront of what companies do. And I think those companies really committed to attracting and retaining the best people will have a really strong EVP, and that will be really evident from looking at their website, from speaking to people who work there. It's consistently throughout their entire business. And we've seen quite a lot of trends emerging with EVP in that I think let's look at a company that's really committed to an EVP and on the things that they would be doing. So, you know, they're reviewing their EVP on a regular basis. It's not just something they create, stick on a website and say, that'll do. It's something they're constantly reviewing. They're speaking to their team, asking for feedback, and they're updating that, particularly when they get to sort of company milestones. I think people have become a lot braver with their EVP, and there's more of a story. They put themselves out there. There's almost a layer of vulnerability. This is who we are, and this is what we're trying to solve. So it's a lot more authentic, and I think that in itself will attract, you know, the right people for your business. And I think it's really important. And what I'm seeing is that people are really committed to their EVP. It's you know, try not to be something that you're not. Be really true to who you are. And it's leading with that EVP, not leading with salary when it comes to hiring people. So that's kind of certainly my take recently on EVP. But if anybody else wants to sort of add to that, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, companies who are committed to their EVP, you know, that's it. It's at the forefront of their business, and that goes with, and this is something that's really important to mention, you know, like the recruitment process plays a big factor in that. So how you treat candidates who apply for roles within your organization, not just the ones that are successful, but those that are not successful is really, really important. You know, job seekers talk to their colleagues, talk to their friends, and you can quite quickly build a bad reputation, which won't resonate with a strong EVP within the job seeking workforce. So it's, you know, like if time to hire processes are really slow, you don't give good feedback, you know, it's all factors that contribute. And, you know, as we've touched, yes, salary is an important factor, but it's not the be all and end all for retaining staff. You've got to look at the bigger picture. So that regularly reviewing your EVP is important. You know, how you portray yourself as an organization on your social media streams is important. You know, that all adds to your brand. You know, the engagement that you get online, the followers that you have, and you know, everyone, pretty much everyone now is using LinkedIn, and that's a really good opportunity to strengthen that brand.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think if you Google EVP, it's quite a transactional like definition. You know, it basically looks at like the sum of everything that you're offering in return for the work that someone's doing for you. But for me, that's too transactional. And actually what you're talking about there, Dan, about, you know, your EVP starts right at that front door, that first engagement, whether that's with yourselves, whether that's through an agency. I think that's incredibly important. Just on that EVP piece and the wider package and just bringing it back to the benchmarking, I wanted to give an example of a company that I worked with a couple of years ago, and they actually had a really strong kind of EVP around their culture, around their remuneration by salary itself was actually really good, but for some reason there was a few offers that were getting rejected once the contracts went through. And after we did a little bit of digging, we found out, and this was a small startup biotech, we found out that candidates were put off by the pension plan wasn't good, and they were looking at bringing on board really experienced individuals at quite a senior level. So for them, pension was quite important. And what we were asked to do and tasked to do was to go away and actually work on that and do a bit of a pension benchmarking exercise. And that was really valuable, because again, it comes down to what's important for that company. And right then it was attracting experienced candidates. Now, experienced candidates, a pension is actually probably more important than a graduate, right? A graduate, I mean, I didn't even think about a pension when I was graduating and thinking about what company I was going to work at. I probably would now. So, you know, don't be afraid to actually really unpick your offering and benchmark that. So when we do say benchmark remuneration, it is not just the salary. It could be pension. It could even be your organizational structure, benchmarking that, benchmarking how you compare, how roles, how skills compare company to company, and think actually our offering's really good here. We're actually giving people a lot of autonomy within a role, etc., etc. So, you know, benchmarking doesn't have to be just fiscal, just pension. It could be other elements as well on how you're performing against your competitor, to build and mold and evolve that EVP regularly.
I think that's a really good idea, and it's something you touched on there about organizational structure. I did some benchmarking for a company, this is a few years ago now, and they were struggling to retain talent. Once people had got a few years into the business, they found that some of that good talent then left to go elsewhere, and we established that effectively the only way somebody could develop was to go into a line management route rather than a sort of technical leadership route. So sort of off the back of that, I worked with them to craft a sort of a more opportunistic structure where people could go into more technical leadership without necessarily being a team leader, and that gave people sort of, you know, better development and better career prospects without having to, you know, sort of literally climb the managerial ladder, which sort of helped them to retain people. But just, and you touched on Googling EVP, so I have just done it. So I mean, interesting stuff. You'll see. I mean, it covers 4 areas. It's compensation, which is what we talked about: salary, pay rises, bonuses, benefits. Some of the things we talked about. It also talks about career development in terms of, you know, training, career opportunities, but also it talks about culture. And that's, you know, the company's mission, their values, sort of atmosphere that the business has, you know, that culture, which is probably something you wouldn't think to look at when you were going through a sort of benchmarking exercise as to your, you know, your attractability and as an employer and things like that. And it did make me wonder, you know, in terms of kind of company's culture and maybe corporate social responsibility, how can that align with an EVP? If anyone wants to have a think about that, how you make your culture apparent in your EVP.
Oof.
I think it's just being really open and authentic about who you are. It's telling that story and being really open about that. I think it's good to sort of celebrate examples of where, you know, your success and celebrating the success of the team. I think it's feeding that also into your recruitment process as well. So when you are hiring, you're bringing that culture into your recruitment process. It doesn't become 2 separate things, because a lot of the time when we work with candidates and companies, we'll have a recruitment process, and then when they join the company, it feels different, and it should never feel different. It should feel consistent throughout. So yeah, that they would be my suggestions, certainly.
Yeah, and I think it's important to make that culture visible, you know, and live it, you know, as well as it just being some words on a website. It needs to be something that, you know, you talk to people in the business, and they you know, they will be able to tell you exactly what it's like, and to have their experience of working there mirrored, and to kind of introduce that, like you say, at the really, really early stages.
I agree. It's about embedded culture, right? It's embedding your culture into your business. That's what creates an EVP. Not going to answer that now. We'll be talking for another hour, but I think the key things to look at are, right, how are you embedding your culture in your benefits? How are you embedding it in the rewards that you're giving, incentives that you're giving? How you performance manage as well, I think is incredibly important, and bringing that back to that culture, your values. So yeah, creating those values, creating that culture, and then making sure that it's embedded across all aspects of your business. That then enables you to hire the right people that will be aligned to your EVP as well. That's a starter anyway into that massive space and topic.
That's a whole
Yeah.
other webinar. But yeah, just to add to what Jacob said, I think it's so often we work with companies that create a culture and they'll have these sort of values, but it's making sure you actually live to those values. Are they values that mean something to the team? Are they values that can be measured and incorporated into all aspects of your business? Otherwise, it just becomes, you know, words on the end of an email or words on a wall behind reception. It doesn't mean anything. And I think when people come into a new business, even during the recruitment process, they will sense that if it's not authentic.
Absolutely. In terms of, and I was going to talk a little bit about, I guess, the changing landscape. I mean, does anyone have any thoughts about how, I suppose, technology changes, you know, benchmarking and EVP, and also what we might expect to see in the future, potential changes and potential things that are coming in?
I think this may or may not answer your question, but it's just something that popped in my head. I think what we've probably missed here is, like, how can you benchmark, right? Like, we've all sat here because we've done it a million times for companies and client searches. But how can you benchmark, and where are those sources? And I may be teaching people to suck eggs here, so I'll whistle stop for it. But there are so many different data points. So obviously you can go to a consultancy and agency and ask them to do some benchmarking for you. They'll go to market. They'll collate a load of data from speaking with people mainly, and that's one way of doing it. But there are others out there. We've got obviously Glassdoor and things like that. But again, we've talked about the reliability of those. LinkedIn, I can't remember. Talent Insights, is that right? Yeah. It's stored on LinkedIn. So that's obviously, it will cost a little bit more, but that's actually quite accurate. And I think Talent Insights on LinkedIn is a really valuable tool. So again, that is talking about technology as well. With regards to technology itself, I think hopefully that will help a more accurate data point. What I've always found amusing, I mean, I pick myself up here, but you know, I studied maths, so for me, I can look at data and analyze it quite well. You've got to be careful, you know, just going to a recruitment business and asking them to benchmark, or a staffing solutions business and asking them to benchmark, who's doing that for you? You know, before it could have just been a spreadsheet with loads of data on it, and they're pulling their own pieces from that, their own kind of takeaways from that. I think with the tech that we now have, I mean, it sounds pretty simple, but you can put in raw data and get some really meaningful insights out of that as well. So I think hopefully that would increase the reliability of some of this data. But yeah, there are platforms out there, Talent Insights, if you're looking at it and want to just have that point in time data, because it's important to have it regular. You know, you can do one benchmark 6 months ago and pay a lot of money for it, but it's 6 months out of date. So actually having this regular data through tech is incredibly important. And Talent Insights on LinkedIn, I think, is a really good starter for 10 there. I can't think of any other bits of tech that really help with that.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair, and I think I mean, I've just had a look. Actually, there's 2022, LinkedIn said there was 34 million users in the UK, so it gives you an idea. That's a decent proportion of the UK workforce that are on LinkedIn. And whilst, you know, data will be a moment in time, it is a good source, and most, you know, good talent agencies will have access to those increased propositions, I suppose, where, you know, like Talent Insights, where they'll be able to give you some reliable data based on things like LinkedIn, as well as phone calls and things. You know, we certainly, agencies, you know, speak to people all the time, candidates all the time. You know, that's part of an ongoing you know, data gathering, you know, exercise for that, and storing that data on databases and things, which is useful.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, for every, you know, recruitment process that a company would undertake, you know, we would obviously advise them based on, you know, taking the accountabilities of the role, the responsibilities, kind of driving in the requirements rather than just looking at the job description. And then obviously you go out to market to chat to candidates that might be suitable, have those skills and experience. So it's, and you gauge their salary expectations, current salary. So it's, you know, it's all that data that we're collecting. So I know that's not a technical advancement that's going up, but there's still the personal touch, especially for those niche roles where the skills are hard to find and evolving very quickly. I think leaning on that expertise is obviously going to be an important factor.
Yeah, without sounding like old and anti-AI, I mean, AI is great and getting that sort of salary data is fantastic. But yeah, coming back to this EVP discussion, it's about the conversations that if you're working with a good recruiter, getting a feel for what's going on in the industry, what works, what doesn't work, what are people looking for, what are people motivated by. And whilst that can be an answer on a questionnaire, I'm a firm believer it's about having really open, honest discussions with a collection of candidates across the market. That's how you truly benchmark for a company and give them really good market insight. So if you're working with a good recruiter, that's what you should expect from your recruiter. It's not just about the data, it's the human element that goes with it, which I would still argue you're not necessarily going to get from some of these AI platforms that are out there. But, you know, I hope to be corrected.
That's fair enough. So if I was an employer on this call and I have learned for the first time EVP, like, oh crikey, what's this? We probably need to have a look at this. What tips would you give them in terms of, you know, how do I start to build my company EVP? You know, what do I need to look at?
I mean, I'm happy to start. Yeah. By all means, guys, add on. I think for me, if I was speaking to a client, first of all, they need to really understand who their organisation is, be clear about who they are. So really do an analysis of your organisation, think about your vision, your values, your culture, you know, what are your milestones as a business, and then hopefully what that will enable you to do is kind of set you apart from your competition in terms of making you an attractive place to work. I think what's really important then is sort of identifying those measures, such as compensation. Benefits is a huge one. But I think also as part of that is we're looking at what could those career pathways look like for sort of future talent. You know, what does that work environment look like? And from that comes your culture. So again, this is all things that will differentiate your business for future talent. I think from that, it's then creating, I think, a really authentic and quite compelling story about your organisation. So it's turning those offerings into a very sort of clear and reflective message that can sort of align to your employer branding. So it's using language that really reflects you as a business. I think that's so important because often you see VPs and you almost think, has somebody else written that for them? It's about making sure that it's come from you as a business and is reflective of you. And then I think once you sort of create that EVP, I mean, I've very much simplified that, but once you've created that EVP, and that can be, you know, that can be quite a long process, and it requires sort of speaking to lots of people and really thinking and reflecting. Once you have that EVP, you then want to integrate that into your sort of recruitment and talent process. So it covers all aspects of that sort of candidate employee journey. And then, as we've touched on earlier, once you've created that EVP and you've made it part of every aspect of your business, it's making sure you then review that on a regular basis and ensure that your EVP evolves as you evolve as a business. Because again, often EVPs are created at the beginning. And if you're a startup, for example, you may not have all the answers straight away. It's okay if that EVP grows and evolves, but it's really, really important that you keep checking in so it doesn't become stale and not relevant to your business. So they would be, I guess, a quick overview of what I'd recommend to a customer.
Great.
Yeah,
So
great.
Anyone?
Well.
Yeah.
I think,
Does anyone have anything to add to that? Yeah.
Just two resources to go and read, really. One, probably more common, everyone knows it, Start With Why by Simon Sinek, really good book to go and read. I think the second of which is Stand For Something by Brian Burkhart. He talks about really what you are standing for in your business, and then how to implement that into your business through ultimately your EVP. He talks it about through values and goals, but that can really come down into your EVP and how you structure it around. So yeah, start with Why, Simon Sinek, and Stand for Something by Brian Burkhart. Really good books, really good resources if you're looking at really developing that, and a good place to start.
And just to add to that, don't be afraid to do some market research on your EVP. If you create an EVP, ask people outside your business, just say, as an outsider looking in, what do you think? Ask for feedback. Does this reflect? And when, often when we do recruitment for companies, it's all about giving the feedback to the candidate, but listen to the feedback you get from your candidates, and a good recruiter would be asking candidate, what was your experience like? Was it what you were expecting? Did that EVP reflect your experience? Really listen to that feedback, because that's really, really powerful insight that you can then use to maybe fine tune your EVP. And it's okay to get some aspects of it. You might not get it right first time, and that's fine. But it's making sure you review it and you evolve it as your business grows, and really listening to that feedback. So that would definitely be my top tip.
I mean, we've Dan and I have been going through a sort of looking at our benefits in our business, and we're finding data, good tangible data online is difficult to find, and it's actually speaking to people that's actually yielding the best sort of data for us to benchmark where we are and look at what businesses are offering. And this is both in our industry as well as out of it as well, seeing what other industries are offering and things like this, and how they put their offering together. And it's he's providing quite a lot of insights in actually speaking to people, although it's useful to have a bit of data from everywhere, I suppose, and kind of pull that together.
An EVP is kind of unique to that organization as well, isn't it? It's it's difficult to measure your EVP against another company, especially if they're much bigger or a different type of business. But it's important to retain that your own identity, isn't it, really, and what you're offering to your employee workforce.
Yeah, absolutely, and that it sits with your, aligned with your cultures, what the experience that you want your employees to have, as they come to work or don't come to work and work from home every day. Something that did occur to me also was we have a multi-generational workforce at the minute, and I wondered if anyone had any thoughts around either benchmarking or kind of EVP and how that sits across sort of a multi-generational workforce, and what different generations might look at and what they might expect from the workplace in terms of that. I see you nodding, Jacob.
I mean, there's going to be some unconscious bias thrown in here, isn't there? That's the problem, right? I think if we broad brush this, then you're in a danger. So maybe that's just something to consider anyway. Are we broad brushing it? Do we need to speak to people? But having said that, the two main points, having recruited and hired and been looking at hiring in, for individuals that are kind of grad or in their first kind of 5 years of work, I think that instant gratification, that demand for a higher salary, and certainly flexibility of working and being at home more are probably the top three things that I've certainly noticed, as opposed to this kind of like, you're going to go in at a ridiculously low salary. If I think about the salary I started on in my career, it was like almost minimum wage. But that was it. You were kind of happy to do it then, and then you knew you were going to work your way up. And whereas now, when I look at some of the base salaries of graduates certainly coming into not just recruitment within life sciences, but also within the life sciences market itself, some of it's extortionate. I think, my gosh, that's unbelievable. So I think there are three key things to think about. I am also conscious of time. Have we got an hour? Is that right?
Yeah. So I was going to sort of summarise.
Because I've got,
see if there's any questions. I don't think there are any yet, but I guess we'll continue to talk over this until such times they cut us off.
They get rid of us.
Got a few takeaways. I think it's really important because we talked about a lot of stuff here.
Yeah.
Not to steal your show here, Neil, at all. But
no, please.
I think it's some of the key points may get a little bit lost, and I agree with you. I think summarising is probably really good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you want to start? What were your
Shall I
key
start?
takeaways
I'll
for
go
this?
first,
Yeah.
take all the good points.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So to summarise, try and get as close to primary data as possible. Ensure that if you're engaging with an agency, consultancy to do this for you, or you're doing it by yourself, get straight to the candidate, get straight to your market to try and understand the data. I think that's incredibly important. Make sure that when you are benchmarking, you're not just benchmarking salary. That's a given from what we said. But equally, you're also looking at not just role, but also skill. So it's skill and role based, not just role based. And finally, to try and keep point in time data as up to date as possible when you are going to your candidates market or just the market in itself. Ask questions around like current and expected. Now, take expected with a little bit of pinch of salt, but actually it can help you just think about, what are you on? What do you believe you should be getting paid in the market? And that can help you just get a little bit ahead of that point in time data. So they're my 3 kind of takeaways.
Yeah.
I'll go next so I don't get the
Yeah.
last one. Sorry, Dan.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think just to start with benchmarking, I definitely agree with what Jacob said. I think it's really important that when companies are working with their benchmarker provider, whether that's a recruiter or a consultancy, as Jacob says, get that primary data. But I would really put a focus on the benefits, because they can be huge differentiators. You could be paying the most competitive salary, but if your benefits are not reflective of what people are looking for, so I would definitely get some data on benefits. But I think, as we've said throughout this, it's make sure you don't use benchmarking and salary data in isolation. So when you think about that EVP, my advice would be really brave with your EVP. Don't be afraid to say who you are, and make sure you celebrate all those good points. The amount of times I speak to biotechs and they just don't bring these really exciting things to the surface. So don't be afraid to be you and really sort of celebrate who you are and bring that story to the forefront. And then I think finally making sure you review your EVP on a regular basis and make sure it evolves as your business evolves.
Yeah, I mean, there's not too much more you can really add. I mean, it's just being agile and, like doing it regularly, isn't it? And consider the workforce that you have in place already is really, really important. Don't forget that. They can be a big influence in your business, and you don't want to bring people in for they're going to impact on that, whether it's a salary consideration. That's the main point, really. But yeah, being agile, reviewing regularly, and taking it from all the different data points that you have available, the surveys, the surveys with your employees, the data that's available out there, but also the processes that you go through when you're recruiting and attracting and retaining people, really. So just using it as much as you can.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose my thought on that was, it finally is probably don't assume anything. I think we see a lot of things where something is a benefit to someone, but it's not necessarily a benefit to somebody else. Don't assume that the value that you place on that thing is going to have the same value translated to somebody else. So I guess flexibility around benefits, understanding. Jacob talked about when he was a grad, when I was in the first few years of my career, I certainly didn't take anything that was offered to me in addition to my salary. I wanted the money. I sacrificed all of the benefits to take the cash, because that's what paid the rent. Whereas now, it's probably a little bit different. I'd have a different outlet, or a different outlook on it. But offering, if I was 22, offering me private healthcare probably wouldn't have been having any value to me. But offer me, a couple of £100 extra in cash, and I'd probably jump at that. So it's about not making assumptions and realizing that one size doesn't fit all in terms of people and what their value is going to be on this. But yeah, that's it. So yeah, I guess we're probably coming towards the end now.
Oh, I just wanted to actually add and ask you all something before we finish the panel. I know we've touched a lot on the company perspective on this and the challenges, but if it hasn't already been mentioned, I wanted to ask you all, what tip would you give in terms of a applicant's perspective on this? I know there's been quite a lot of advice to companies, but for someone that's, you know, either starting their careers or, you know, looking to switch from a company to another, is there anything that you would advise?
So I'm on the market at the moment, so maybe I can answer this one. No, so it is really tough, right? You always get asked what salary you're looking for, what salary you want. Well, that was for the job that I was doing, right? So what I think there's a couple of points here. Have a little look on the market. Obviously, do your own benchmarking through things like, you could look at some job adverts. You could look at Glassdoor. You can get a bit of a feel for it. But remember, everything that we've just talked about, that's not based on your motivations as an individual. That's just a rough guide on a salary. And that doesn't take into account, the full remuneration package or yourself. Keep that information to yourself. I would say equally, don't give up the salary that you're looking for. It can be really hard sometimes. You just say, what salary? Oh, I'm looking for X, but really try not to, and say, well, look, ask the company what they're looking for, what value they see on this role, and what value they see in yourself. And if that's something that's acceptable for you based on the full remuneration, then that's important. If I talk about my own experience over the last few months, I've been offered salaries much higher than maybe what I was looking for, but for me, they weren't acceptable. The culture wasn't right, the flexibility wasn't right. I don't want to work with people that aren't like-minded. So for me, that really comes into my thinking is, well, it's not just about salary for me. Now, for other people, it may be that actually salary is the most important. To Neil's point, they need it for, that is their actual goal. It's just about the salary. They're in a different maybe stage in their career and life. So that would be my tip. Keep your cards close to your chest. Don't just give up a number. Ask about what they're willing to pay for this role, what value they believe you can add to the business. It can be really tough, but believe me when I say companies won't be surprised when you say that. They work in this industry, they get it, they work, they've hired many people before. So that's my little bit on that one.
I mean, just to add to that, my advice to candidates is use your network. Talk to people in your network. I mean, if we take Cambridge as a great ecosystem, there's all your network. Reach out to people, ask them their thoughts. And as Jacob says, it does really depend on what your motivator is. For many, it's a combination of salary, obviously wanting to work with somebody with certain area of science, but don't be afraid to speak to your network, get their thoughts on potential employers. What do they think? What's their experience been like? I think that can be really powerful.
And I think, just to add to that finally, I hate this kind of this weird culture we have in this country where we don't talk about salary. I think it's really, really odd. If you're coming in and adding a value in a company, that company should have benchmarked internally as well and actually thought about how there should be an equilibrium within the business. It should be fair. There shouldn't be pay gaps when we're talking about D&I as well. We've not even touched upon that yet, because that would be a whole another fireside chat. So for me, as individuals, be open about your salary. I've been open with Philippa. I've got Philippa's advice through this job search about, my value, what I can add, and got Philippa's points of view on it. And she's helped me be really open and ask questions to prospective employers about what the value is. So, that's how everyone on this call, anyone who views this, can add value to the market. Let's talk about our remuneration. Let's talk about our salary. Let's talk about what's important to us more. And then hopefully that will create a better landscape overall.
Yeah, and we've seen evidence in other sort of ecosystems or other areas where talking about salary more openly can only be a positive thing, because I think having that openness and transparency, it really fosters better discussions, and I think it allows people to really value their worth and be really confident about that. So I completely agree with Jacob's point.
Thank you. Did you, Dan or Neil, have anything to add?
I mean, I've seen Laura's question, which kind of came at the same time as you, and I don't know whether that was what inspired you to ask your question, but
I think it came at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I always coach people, certainly who are maybe going for interview. That's a question that's going to come up in the interview. What do you expect? And I would always say to them, if you can avoid giving a hard figure, talk about your value as as an employee in terms of your skills and experience, what you can bring to the table, and wanting to receive sort of competitive pay and reward for that, rather than necessarily giving a figure. Because I think sometimes when we're asked to give a figure, we probably go a little bit low, because you don't want to kind of price yourself out of a job potentially if it's a really interesting proposition, and then you're into all the sort of other things like the the great culture and things. Obviously these have value in themselves. So arm yourself with some information around what jobs typically pay, and we aren't in a culture where that's often readily available, but there is stuff out there if you have a dig around. But also sort of go in with a little bit of a caveat to say that actually it's up to them to really to sort of think about where they see your value in their business, and to be able to pay you competitively. And certainly if they've most businesses would want to bring people in competitively, so that's where I would approach it from.
Just to quickly add to that, a question I always say to candidates, particularly if you get an offer that you're not expecting, i.e. it's a bit lower, don't be afraid to ask the employer, can you explain to me how you've come to that figure? Can you give me a breakdown of how you've reached that salary? Because then that puts the emphasis on them to sort of explain, I guess, their own sort of internal benchmarking, etc. So don't be afraid to ask that question. That's a very sort of reasonable thing to explore, particularly if it's come in slightly lower than your expectations.
Thank you. That's really.
And if they ask if it's negotiable, say yes, upwards.
Oh, that's great. Before I close this off, Dan, did you have anything to add?
I think the guys have all made really good points. Yeah, it's a balancing act, and I think you don't want to undervalue yourself as a job seeker, and I think just go in with that, and to all the points that the guys have made. It's you don't want to undervalue yourself.
That's great, and that's really helpful. Thank you, everyone. Just to close this off, thank you for everyone who's joined us today, and Neil and the rest of the panel. That was really informative and helpful. I just wanted to mention before we disconnect, I'm going to send a link into the chat. We have just 2 hours to vote for the Life Science Inspiration of the Year Award, which will be announced in the last panel of today at 3 o'clock. So feel free to have a look and vote if you haven't already. And just to remind everyone, the session has been recorded, and I will make sure to add that to the app to watch it back into our YouTube channel. So don't worry if you've missed it. And our next session is in half an hour time. That'll be on the role of social media in recruitment and career development. So it's due to be a very insightful discussion. And yes, I hope you all enjoy the session. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.